Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Virtual Event Space. You are tuned into 5 handy techniques to speed your Lightroom workflow with the wonderful Russell Graves, who has become a staple here at the event space. Russell, thank you again for joining us. We always love having you on.
Thank you. I always love being here. It's always a lot of fun.
Well, you bring the fun, you bring the good positive vibes, and you bring plenty of experience and information. So I'm going to say it once again. I'm not a Lightroom person, so maybe one day it'll click for me. So I'm going to be tuned in, paying attention with all the viewers. And I hope if you guys have any questions out there, you feel free to get them in. But I'm going to be looking for my questions as well because there's something about Lightroom I just don't grasp. So maybe one of these tips today will help me out.
Well, the thing about Lightroom, and I'll tell everyone who's listening, just so you know, I mean, there's, like we say out here in the country in Texas, there's a million ways to skin a cat. There's a lot of different ways of doing the same thing. And so these are some of my ways I'll talk about today. Just some, it's not all the ways you can speed up your workflow, but it's a few that I've found handy and that have really, that I have found that makes a huge difference in how quick it takes to do my work. Because of all the things I do in photography, this part is the part I probably like the least. I'd rather be out taking pictures of cool stuff. But you know, the necessary evil is that you got to come back in and you've got to do something with that mountain of images. And so because that takes time, I'm just always looking for ways to be efficient, always looking for ways to speed the process up. And today I'll share with you five, maybe not my absolute favorites, but among five of my favorites.
Perfect. Well, I'll let you do what you do best, and
Okay.
I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
Well, awesome. Thank you. Hey, thanks everybody for having me. Let me get all this sort of changed around for a second. Uh, Welcome. My name is Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm in Dodge City, Texas. It's kind of a dreary day today. Uh, we uh, we had a cold front blow through, and the temperatures went from being in the 60s all last week, beautiful days last week, to we're down in the 30s and 40s this week, and kind of rainy and drizzly. So it's a good day to be in. Good day to give a webinar about 5 handy techniques to speed your Lightroom workflow. If anyone's listening and you're wondering, the wildfires, or Texas is a big state, all the wildfires out here, which are tragic, are pretty good ways away from me. But I will tell you, I used to live in that part of Texas where the wildfires are happening. It's about 80 miles, or no, I'm sorry, about 60 miles north of where I used to live. And so, uh, but we'd had big wildfires in my area before too. And so it's a scary time. It's, you know, luckily that's a lot of big open country. But people have been affected. So, you know, I'd ask it to keep those people in your thoughts as they deal with some pretty tragic circumstances. But anyway, we'll get to it. So I got to tell you before I get started, this will be a little cumbersome. So bear with me because I've got the standard presentation I'll show you, but every few slides I'll go to a demonstration. So there's gonna be a little bit of lag as I switch from the presentation over to a live view of my screen, so I can demonstrate some of these Lightroom techniques for you as we go along. So with that said, here we go. You know, I said in the intro, one of the things I'm always looking to do is make the whole workflow efficiently. I make my living as a photographer, and so the old adage that time is money is absolutely true. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of shave off the process. And you may think to yourself, well, just a few seconds at a time doesn't make any difference. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to share with you some math to show you how big a difference it really does make when you start looking at ways to become more efficient in the process and do things quicker and do things better. If you work in any kind of manufacturing or you're working in any kind of production based industry, you'll recognize some of these techniques, and you absolutely know why shaving time off various processes really adds up over time. And again, I'm going to show you some real world examples. So, you know, I'd mentioned I'd rather be out looking for cool opportunities like this and taking cool shots like this. And so I want to spend more of my time doing this kind of stuff and less of my time just being bogged down by the workflow part of it. But I found out too, if you really focus on uh, trying to streamline your process and trying to make it more efficient on the Lightroom process, people have a tendency of, and I've learned this. I've taught thousands of people at workshops all over the country, and I've learned that a lot of people get bogged down. They get their images back home. They don't have a clear workflow, whether they're using Lightroom or some other kind of post processing software package. And so they get those images in and they just tend to sit and they tend to sit and they tend to sit. Well, images are, we take them and they're made to be loved. And so it's always best just to do something with them, share them on social media, make prints of them, you know, make books of them, whatever you do with your images in the end, they deserve to be seen by yourself and your family and other people. And so by streamlining the workflow, it makes this back end part of it a whole lot more fun because you've got to focus on what you need to do to get from point A to point B, and you get through it quicker. And then going out on a shoot and shooting 3 or 4,000 images doesn't become intimidating on the back end anymore. So that's really the aim, and really trying to become efficient. And so again, I'll say this: these aren't the absolute only ways to speed up your Lightroom workflow. As we were working on this webinar, these are just 5 of the common ways that I use to work on my pictures, and there's a lot more. I'd be interested to hear. So as I go through this, if you have any questions or comments, or I'd like to, and I'll share my email address with you later. I'd like to hear what your things you do to speed up your Lightroom workflow is. And again, I'd mentioned this too. The way I'm going to explain these today, I know in Lightroom, there's a lot of different ways of doing the same thing. These are just the ways I do it. Sometimes I'll explain it in a way that may not be the absolute quickest way to do, but it's the easiest way to explain to someone, then they can discover the shortcuts later, like the keyboard shortcuts. So the first thing I do is I love adjusting specific colors using the color picker tool. Now, this recently changed in Lightroom on this menu item. But if you go into the color mixer part, you'll see this is what it looks like. And I'll switch over here in a second and kind of give you a real world demonstration. But these color pickers allow you to isolate a particular color in a picture and then work on that, just that particular color. And it's amazing. In the past, what you used to have to do was use the selection brush and select all those colors and work on them. Well, now, if you find one global color you want to boost up, whether it's the hue, saturation, or luminance, the HSL, it allows you to do that with one pretty simple solution. So with that said, here we go. Let me switch over to Lightroom Classic. And I'm guessing y'all can see that now. I've preloaded some pictures already that you should be able to see right there. Let me double check that, make sure it's being shared correctly. There we go. Okay, I think we're good. So I've selected a few pictures, and like this one right here, these are fireflies in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the develop menu, and then it's going to load everything up there. And in the develop menu, if you look down on all the choices we have, I'm going to click down here on the right hand side on the color menu. And so if you remember that last slide I showed you, it had that little dot. So just on hue, I'm going to click that little dot. But before I do that, I'm going to zoom in so I can get a better look at one of those fireflies. So if I click on that and I put my little crosshair on that color, I can actually, if you look at my slider on the right hand side of the panel, you can see that slider changing. All I'm doing is rolling up really slowly on that color. So I can change the hue, or I can change the saturation, or I can change the luminance of that color and really make it look the way I kind of saw in the wild. Now, if you notice all around it, when you use that color picker, it's not changing anything. It's not changing any of the colors. Here, let me zoom back out, and I'll try to find another one and show you again. So when I zoom in on that color, if you notice, it's not changing any of the other colors in the images, just the colors of those fireflies. And it's subtle, and you can see as I roll through there, see those colors going from green all the way to kind of more of a yellowish color. Now, I'm going to the extreme so you can see it, but really probably the more natural color for those things are somewhere right in there. But I'll reiterate, if you go in Lightroom in the develop panel on the right hand side, you choose color mixer, and then you've got that little dot from which to choose that you can go in and select in just those specific colors. This technique works great, saves a ton of time because you're not having to pick out each one of those dots and paint it. It's a really local kind of fix that you do. It's not global. It's not going to affect anything more than the image other than that one color. But I found this works really good when you've got something like fireflies, or you're doing fall colors and you're really trying to boost a specific color in that picture, or increase the saturation of a specific color in that picture. It works wonders, and it just takes a couple of seconds to do, and it really shaves a lot of time off the process. So with that said, let me switch back to Keynote. There we go. I think we're good there. Oops. Yeah, so I'm going back to just show you the place that is, just that little dot. When you click it, it's going to put two little icons on the screen. One looks like a little crosshair, and the other one is just a motion that you can roll that crosshair with your mouse up and down to kind of barely move that color. And in the mouse, I like doing it better. You can actually come in here and drag the sliders as well, but I like using the mouse because it's just a little more intuitive for me. And the second thing I found helpful, and these are you know, a lot of this stuff is situational. You don't use it on every picture. I will show you a trick in the end that does work on every picture that really, it's kind of the game changer. I'm literally, to me, in my opinion, I'm saving the best for last. And so, but some of these, like the color picker or the inverted gradient filters, you don't necessarily need them for every picture you're going to take. But when you have pictures that it requires it, that's where it really comes in handy. And so this is a good scene. I use the inverted gradient filters here. And so this scene, Schwabacher's Landing, Grand Teton National Park. I don't know if anyone's ever been, but it's one of those iconic views of the mountains. Just a beautiful spot, sunrise spot. When you go there in the morning, the sun's directly, this was in the fall, the sun's directly at your back. And so essentially you're just waiting for the sun to come up and start reflecting off the mountains. But the problem is the sun hits the mountains first. And so you've got this whole area of trees and water in the foreground that's darker. And then you've got the sky that's a lot brighter. So it forces you to kind of make some choices. Now, in the old days, and I don't really carry them anymore. In the old days, they used to have a selection of graduated neutral density filters in my bag. And I just don't carry them anymore because Lightroom makes it so easy to add a graduated neutral density filter and a graduated filter in post processing. And so I usually choose to do that. So typically on to kind of wade in the weeds a little bit on a picture like this, typically what I'll do if the scene has a tricky exposure like this and it's outside the dynamic range that your camera can naturally capture without having to do an HDR or something like that, I just ask myself a simple question. And it is a simple question. The way I pose it to myself is I ask myself, who's the star of the show? It's so this is like a scene that's made up of an ensemble cast, but there's really one star, and that's the mountains in the background. So I'll usually expose for the mountains and then kind of let all the other tonalities fall where they're going to fall and then do the post-processing work later. But my demonstration, let me switch back over. Go back to my little quick selection I made of the pictures. So here's a picture of that. Here's that image, the way it came out of the camera. If you notice there, it's a little bright. I try to expose on the mountains, but the tonal range of the light in this image is just all over the place. And so since I'm going to switch over to the develop menu. Since I know with Lightroom now, you can go over here to the all the mask and you can select the sky, and I'm going to do that and show you something. So it's detecting sky right now, and it's going to show me that's where I'll be able to mask out. Now, the thing, I'm not a big fan of the sky selection, the sky mask tool. And the reason why is I think it looks more, if you look at this, if I go outside, if I could see the blue sky above right now, I could go outside and look. And the sky, actually, it's bluer above me. And then as you get close to the horizon, it gets more kind of a white color or, a translucent color. And so the problem with this global fix, if you do the sky selection, is there are a couple of problems with it. To me, it doesn't look as natural. I'd rather use the graduated filter on it. But the second thing it does, if you notice, it will pick the sky. But if you look in the reflection, it doesn't do the same thing there. And so if we're going to be true to the picture and true to the reflection, we want those changes we make in the sky, the fixes we make in the sky, to be reflected in the water down below it. And so instead of spending a lot of time working on the picture and trying to match it, this is a pretty good little technique for doing it really fast. So I'm going to go to my mask. and then I'm going to select linear gradient. And if you've never used a linear gradient before, it's great for landscape photos. Think about the windshield in your vehicle. It's clear up front, but as you get towards the top, it slowly becomes tinted. And that's exactly what a gradient filter does. And the thing about doing it in post-processing is we've got a lot of flexibility in terms of how the different colors we can add, and just the different options we have for changing the exposure, changing the tones, changing the temperature, all kinds. I mean, again, a lot of different ways of doing the same thing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this thing down. And again, me explaining it takes infinitely longer than me doing it in real life. And so I've just created a graduated neutral density filter. And so I'm going to show you is I'm going to make that thing darker, and you can see how I go to the plus side on the exposure, how it affects the sky. But you see that's the only part of the images it's affecting. Now, if I go back to this, and if you notice there's a black dot right in the middle of this filter, I'm gonna control click on Mac, or it's a right click on PC. I'm just gonna right click on that black dot, and I'm gonna say duplicate linear gradient, and it's gonna create another one there for me. And so I'm gonna click it one more time, and I'm gonna tell it to invert. So essentially what I've done is I've made a duplicate of that filter, and I've turned it upside down. So that way you can see right there, it's creating that same filter on the sky below it. Now look what happens. When I change that, if I make any changes to my first filter, look what it's doing down below. It's mimicking those same changes on that same filter. So if you're really a stickler for making the skies match and the reflections down below, this is a great way of doing it. And again, this particular duplicating these masks, these graduated mask, isn't necessarily a technique I'd use on every picture, but when you're trying to match the sky with the reflection in the water, whether you're doing a mountain picture or a wildlife picture or whatever, or a picture of your kids or whatever, this is a great way of making all that kind of match when you use that filter. Just again, I'll go through it one more time. Let me back out of this. The good thing about Lightroom, I'll explain this. If you're not a power user of it, over on the left-hand side, you've got the history. It gives you a step-by-step recipe book of all the changes you made to make the image where it is now. So I'm just going to go back the way I imported it, which is the original way. So I'll go through this thing a little quicker now. So in the develop menu, I'm going to click the mask menu, and then I'll select a linear gradient, and then I'll drag that out where I want it. And then on that black square in the middle, I will do two things. I'll duplicate it first, and then on the duplicate I just did, I'll invert it. So I'm going to just flip it upside down and then move it down below. And then I can change my exposure. I can change my white balance. I can do whatever I want to. And it will give you a duplicate filter down below that helps you match the colors in the sky to the colors in the reflection. And it's just a great way of great time-saving way of making those masks. And again, if you've never used the mask before on landscape shots, the graduated mask on landscape shots, I would highly recommend it because it's a way to go. And then number 3, so I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm an early adopter of Lightroom. I'm going to tell you a little history lesson real quick. And some of y'all may recognize this, but when I first started making the switch to digital, gosh, 2005, 2006, I recognized one of the big problems was going to be trying to keep up with the catalog as it grew, because we buy cameras to go out and take pictures. And so if you take pictures and you keep a number of your pictures, your image catalog is only going to grow and grow and grow over time. And so early on, I adopted 2 programs I tried out. One was Aperture. And I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it was an Apple product that they had for a few years, and they eventually discontinued it. Nice product, but the reason why I opted for Lightroom over Aperture was because they did really similar things. But the one thing that I opted for Lightroom over Aperture is Lightroom let me keep my existing folder structure, how I had my images how I had my images organized. And so because of that, I started using Lightroom version 1 a long, long time ago. I'm not even sure what version we are now, but I've been a Lightroom user for a long time. I wouldn't consider myself a Lightroom expert in the sense that I know all the shortcuts and I know how to do every single little thing. But the things I do know how to do, I'm pretty good at it, because the one thing that I feel like I'm really strong at, because the neat thing about using a program like Lightroom is a lot of people I deal with that are going on workshops with me, they see it as a place to ingest images and just work on their images, then be able to output them for something else. But the one thing that gets glossed over are all the powerful database tools that are within Lightroom. I've got an image collection. I'll show you. Well, I can show you in a minute. I don't know how many's in it. 700,000 pictures in my catalog right now that I go through. And I can literally find just about any image in my catalog in just a matter of seconds by using all the tools that are built in. And so those tools include, maybe you've used them before, those tools include color labels and stars. And, I know I did a webinar for B&H on the same platform a few months ago about organizing your pictures, but I won't get much into that. But one of the key things I found to really help find pictures and help find them fast is you can customize your metadata search. And so what I mean by that is, if you get in your library module in Lightroom and you click, you can see I clicked here on metadata. This is just a screen grab. It'll give you 4 choices to sort your metadata, but a lot of people don't know you can actually change those choices to, I'd have to do the math, to see how many different combinations of that you can put, but thousands of different combinations you can use to search through the metadata on your cameras. And so where that's helpful is, number one, every digital image you take, the recipe on how it's made, the camera that was used, the lens that was used, the setting of the lens, your ISO settings, all that stuff is saved in every image we take. And it's just there. You don't have to add it. It's just always there. And it's a pretty powerful way to go back and be able to search your images. And so let me switch over again. So on my demonstration, get out of that one. So you can see here, I've got, I don't know if you can read that number or not, but I've got 699,500 images in this catalog, in this folder right here. And so this is just all of them in sequential order. And so what I can do is, in my metadata tab at the top, when I'm in the library module, I can click on metadata. So I'm just going to go here to my agriculture folder. And this happened the other day. I was, got to give it a second to load up. This happened the other day. I was actually looking for a picture. Can't remember the picture I was looking for, but I remembered when I took it, I used the flash. And so I use this same technique I'm showing you right now to be able to find the pictures that were made using the flash. And I'll show you a demonstration. So I think this is the default fields that come in Lightroom. So it's got the date, and it's got, all the way back to 2002 when I've got images, the digital images in this one folder. This folder, by the way, has 55,000 images in this agriculture folder. It's got it by the date, the month, and the day. You can find it by that. Of course, it's got the cameras I used. It's got the lenses I used, and it's got the labels that I've assigned to them. Well, one of the things that Lightroom lets you do is, like, next to where it says camera on here, it's got a drop-down menu that you can open up. And then it gives you all these ways to look for pictures. For example, I'm going to change that to flash state. And so it reads from left to right, and you can change these in any order you want to. So I'm going to say, I'm going to select all the dates in this folder, and I'm just going to find those pictures that where the flash did fire. And if you look there, we're looking for a needle in a haystack. But by using these metadata tools and be able to use these different filters, we're making the haystack a whole lot smaller that we have to look through. And so if you look at did fire or did not fire, there's 53,642 images that did not fire. And I'm sorry, I wear readers and I've got to look like tilt my head back to see the top of the screen well. But there's 53,642 images in this folder where the flash did not fire, but there's only 1,300 where they did fire. And so if I click that, it'll show me all the images in here where I use the flash and the flash fired on the picture. Now, some of these are old pictures, so don't judge me on them, but still, uh, instead of me looking through almost 60,000 images looking for a particular picture, I can change that. And then I can say, okay, show me the pictures that I use with the 85 millimeter lens, because that's kind of my go-to portrait lens. And so now, instead of 1,300, there's 113 pictures that I used. There's 113 pictures that I used the flash on that I shot with 85 millimeter lens. And so by changing, and I can even do that, I'm going to change my ISO speed. And I'm going to tell it to show me all the pictures in my agriculture folder that had the flash that fired, shot with the 85 millimeter lens, shot at ISO 100. And then there's 17 there that I shot on ISO 100. So changing those out and using those to search the metadata that's already built into your images you take. It's just a really, really powerful way to find images really, really quick. And so to back up on you just a little bit, one of the things that I do whenever I look for pictures, I use a combination of the metadata, the folder system that I use to find pictures quicker, and then the metadata, and then I color label mine. So I can, if I'm gone somewhere, I can call my wife and tell her, hey, go in my agriculture folder, look for all the images that were shot with 85 millimeter lens at ISO 100 that are labeled purple. And then she can just do this same little thing and find. And my wife, by the way, not to pick on her, but she doesn't keep up with what I do on this. So, but the fact that I can talk her through it and she can find those images quick is really helpful to me. It'll be helpful to you because it's one of those things that'll really speed up your workflow and how fast it takes you to find images once you've already taken and just kind of get through the process. And I think, again, the whole idea is getting through the process and getting back out and taking pictures. All right, let me switch back again. Hope this is making sense to everybody. If you have any questions or if I go too fast, just chime in on the chat. I'll be sure to be happy to go back when we get to the end of this and re-explain it again and show you a couple things. But I always like to look at these pictures in between time. But yeah, if I was to go look through all 700,000 of those images, I could find that one particular armadillo or that one particular raccoon image in just a matter of seconds. Oh, I mentioned, I forgot one thing. I use a combination of the metadata, the image that's built into the images, like I just showed you. I use a combination of color labels, the folders that I organize all my images in, and I'm also pretty strict about keywording images too. So I find that helpful as well. I don't really talk about keywording in this too much as a way to speed up your workflow, but it definitely will. I've already talked about that to some length in another webinar, but maybe we'll revisit it in the future. So this is a picture of Soda Butte Creek. This is in Yellowstone. It's right, if you've been to Yellowstone before, this is right after you pass right as you get up into the Lamar Valley, right as you pass those bathrooms before that road curves back and goes towards Cook City, Montana. And this is actually there. I put this picture in here. This has got a graduated neutral density filter in it because I darken the sky a little bit. And if you notice, you can change the white balance, or you can add a little pop of color in those filters. And that's what kind of adds a little bit of definition to that cloud in the upper left-hand shot of this. Really, really kind of helps out a lot. And then number 4, moving images. And this is one of those things, if you know it, you know it. If you don't know it, it's about to kind of change the way you look at things, because I've talked to a number of people they're fairly new users to Lightroom. And one of the things that they say, when I start organizing my pictures in the folders, it just takes me so long to move them. And forever, I thought, I can't figure out why, because, Lightroom, it's, for as universally used as it is, as commonly used as it is. I don't know the percentage of photographers that use it, but I know a big percentage of photographers use this. And it's a nice program, but that's not to say it doesn't have some limitations, because it does. And one of the things is it can be slow. One of the things I teach when I teach my webinar about managing your images and how to catalog them and find them later on and just what to do with them doesn't have anything to do with editing. It has more to do with just how do you organize your images. One of the things I mentioned, because Lightroom is not the best at, when you're trying to, when you ingest all your images into Lightroom for the first time and you're trying to go through and pick out the good ones from the bad ones, uh, it lags sometimes. It can be slow, and I've got a Thunder Bay 4 network attached storage that's attached via uh, uh, Thunderbolt connection. It's pretty fast, but it's still you can outrun it. And so one of the things I always suggest to people is, because Lightroom does have its limitations, is there's another software program that's called Photo Mechanic that is a lot faster and just being able to look through images quick. And so all in the sense of trying to save time on the process and shave time off the process. That's why I recommend Photo Mechanic just as a tool, just to go through images quick. But people start reporting to me that when I start moving images, that's when it gets really slow. And we do a deep dive into, their settings and the kind of hardware they're using, what makes sense. Well, it finally dawned on me uh, what the problem was. And they didn't realize there was one kind of neat feature in Lightroom. And I took it for granted that everyone knew. So that's why, if you know this, you know it. If you don't know it, I'm about to save you a ton of time. Uh, that's why I started adding this. That's why I added this into this presentation as well. Oh, let me get to the demonstration part. So here's the demonstration here. Switch back over. Okay, here we are back in Lightroom. So I figured out when I was talking to people what they were doing. Let me see what we've got here. These are just some miscellaneous pictures I've got in this folder. So I found out what people were doing, and when they were moving pictures were they were just moving them from, they were just grabbing them one at a time and trying to drag them over into a folder or over in a quick collection that they have. And that's what was taking so long. But really, the proper way to move images, and you always do this in Lightroom. You don't do it outside of Lightroom, because if you do it outside of Lightroom, Lightroom can't keep up with where your pictures are. So one of the things that I always do, and I'll just go into this agriculture folder again. One of the things I always do is you can actually select. I mean, you can see that's the limitation I'm talking about. Lightroom, sometimes if you've got a big catalog, it bogs down a little bit. So in Lightroom, you can actually select multiple images. I'm not going to move these, but I'll show you. I'll just select these pictures, and then you can just grab right in the middle and see it creates that stack. And when you create that stack of images, you can move that stack of images into another folder wherever you want to. And when the green arrow shows up, you just drag and drop them in there. And so what Lightroom does is Lightroom will keep up with the new location of those pictures. That's why you've got to do that when you're working in Lightroom. And so it's so much quicker that way you can move hundreds of images at a time and just let that kind of work in the background while you move on to something else. And that was the mistake that I found a surprising number of people making, is that they thought you could only move one image at a time. Now, a couple of shortcuts to show you. You don't have to. I just went through and I held down I right clicked and held those down and clicked them. You don't have to click each one individually. There's actually a couple of different ways you can do it. Number one, if you've got a series of images like this is at a dairy barn out in West Texas. If you hold down the first picture, you can actually go to the last picture in the series, like this one of these cows, and I'm gonna hold down Shift and select it. So you select the first picture, hold down Shift, select the last picture in that series, and it selects everything in between. And that's a quick way of doing it. Another way of doing it, if you know where everything is in the folder, it's just the old Control A, like we all learned a million years ago when you're doing word processing on a computer. They'll select all at one time. But a lot of times what I'll do is, just because when I come in for a shoot, let's say, because the way I organize my images, I may have bear pictures, I may have pictures of the water in Smoky Mountain National Park or wherever else I'm going, and just all these random pictures. And so I'll just try to go through and pick all the light pictures together. Click Shift, click the first one, go to the last one in the series, click Shift again, and then drag those over again. All you got to do, you can't drag them on the color part. You have to go to the middle of the picture, click and hold down, and then when you start moving it, you'll see it creates a stack of images, and it's showing me there I'm moving 18 images at one time. So that's a big time saving thing as well. And then I'm going to go backwards on this real quick. Now, I always like talking about these pictures some. This shot here, this would be a good candidate. I've never done it, but if you use that first trick I showed you on the color selector to pick out some of those individual colors, like the reds or the yellows in those leaves, and just give them a little bit of a pop. A lot, a lot of times, if you watch very many of my webinars, I kind of tend to recycle the same images over and over that are in the presentation. And that's just me being a little bit lazy because it's just quicker for me to just to add the pictures I've already got in the folder without having to go find new ones and curate a whole new set. But this picture here of the waterfall with the swirly leaves, it's a shot I've been looking for since I first started taking pictures. I saw a picture in a magazine or a book like that 30 something years ago. And I thought I'd always love to take a shot like that. And it's so situational how it works. Essentially, what happens is when you have a waterfall and the water's running through, because the water on this close side to us is running faster than the water against the rock, it tends to create a whirlpool. And so if you get some leaves falling in it, that will create a swirl with the leaves. So this was shot maybe a 2-second exposure. I'd have to look at the metadata to tell you for sure, but it's a long exposure, as you can tell. And it's and so I was in the Smoky Mountain National Park last fall, I think it was, maybe the fall before that. Anyway, happened to find the spot, and no, it was the fall of 22. I found it, happened to find the spot, was so excited about it, took the pictures. Actually, a workshop I was teaching, we found that. And then I went back to the same spot this year, and because the water level had changed just a little bit and the water flow was a little bit different coming over that little waterfall, you didn't get that same look there. So I was happy to take that when I did. And been lucky enough to go to Botswana a few times, and this is one of the shots from there. From we'll set in a blind over a water hole and be able to look at elephants that are way too close to photograph with a telephoto lens. And this is in my home state of Texas, where southern swamps, Caddo Lake, which is beautiful. But this is another good example of that color picker, that if you want to accentuate the color or take the color out of just a one particular color that you see in the landscape, that's a great way of doing that. And the fifth one, as I said, I was saving the best for last. And the fifth one is really this auto sync. This auto sync is a great way of just rolling through a bunch of pictures fast, because I don't know if people are, and I'll just go ahead and call myself lazy. Lightroom, and it's getting better every day. And if you'll admit it, I'm right about this, but the auto function of Lightroom has gotten so much better over the years, where most of the pictures, I'm not going to say all the pictures, but most of the pictures, if you start your workflow like I do, the first thing I do when I'm ready to develop pictures is I'll hit auto, because I want to see what Lightroom thinks. And oftentimes, I can't tell you a percentage, but a high percentage of images, Lightroom, when I hit auto, it gets it right. Saves me time from having to go and make all those individual adjustments. Now, if anything it does when I hit auto, it gives me a pretty good starting point of where Lightroom thinks it needs to correct the image. So a lot of times I can go back in and change the exposure, or I can change the blacks or change the shadows or whatever else. But the auto does a good job of just initially fixing that picture for me. And so if you look in the develop menu at the bottom, you'll see a button that says sync. And next to that button, I've got it circled here, there's like a little light switch. And so what I like doing is so the scenario is I've been out, I've taken a bunch of pictures, I've ingested all of those into my Lightroom. I went ahead and got rid of the ones that are bad. I'm only working with the ones I like. And I know you can do this on when you're bringing the images into Lightroom too. I don't like doing it there because it does slow it down a little bit. I just prefer to go through the pictures first in their raw state, how I took them, and then go back to make the adjustments later. And so, but next to that sync button, you'll see that light switch. Flip that light switch on, and it'll turn to auto sync. And then let's watch the magic happen. I'm gonna switch this over real fast again. I'm going to change all this back, but okay, let's just use these pictures I've got already selected here. Let me select a few more. So I've got 39 pictures selected, and I'm going to develop these at one time. So my workflow works like this. Whenever I ingest my pictures, they all go into one folder on my desktop. And then that's when I start the process of going through and editing and kicking out the bad ones, editing the ones I want to edit, keywording, all that takes place in one folder. And so what I can do is I can select all the pictures in that folder. And like I said, let me do this real quick. I should have done this earlier. Just make it a little easier to see, I think, maybe. I don't know if you can see that red circle around my mouse. I don't know if that translates through Zoom, but anyway, I went to the develop module, and it's on the bottom right of the develop module. It says sync, and like I showed you in the screenshots, next to sync is a little button or a little switch that you click, and it'll switch it up, and then it changes it there that you saw to auto sync. Again, I'm in the lower. If you can't see the red circle around my mouse, I'm in the lower right hand corner of the Lightroom screen, and so I'm going to click it. It's going to change to auto sync, and then I'll just hit auto sync one time. Or I'm sorry, I'll turn it to auto sync, and then I'll go up in my develop module and I'll hit auto one time. And so what that does is you just saw it flash in front of you. It auto updated 39 images, and it did it in an instant. And so, but it doesn't apply the same settings to every single one of those images. Essentially what it's doing is looking at all the images that you've got selected and applying the auto settings to each and every image. I'm going to show you that one more time because I kind of flubbed that up a little bit. So I've got all my images selected. I'm going to turn on auto sync. Then I'm going up in my develop menu up to the basic menu options, and I'm just going to hit auto. You see it says it again, auto updated for 39 images. If you roll through those images and you look over here in our exposure and our highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, you'll see with each image that changes just a little bit, because again, Lightroom will make various adjustments on each particular image. Now, a lot of these look the same and the changes are subtle, but it does that on each particular image. And you may not think it, but where that saves time is if I'm, like last summer when I got back from Botswana, I had something like 42,000 images to edit. And if I was to go through each and every one of those images when I start on the next one and go up and hit auto on every single one, may not seem like much, but that traveling that real estate from where you've been working on the picture all the way up to the top of the screen to hit auto on every single image, that time adds up over time. And so by using the auto sync, to me, that I haven't known that for very long, but when I discovered that this would do that, I was just flat amazed. And that one workflow shortcut has sped up so much of my workflow time. It's amazing. Now, you may be asking yourself, Russell, all these little things you showed us, the first couple are situational. They don't work in every use. I can see we're looking through the metadata will save you time, but how in the world can auto? Surely it doesn't take much time moving your cursor up over and over again. Well, believe it or not, this one will show you here in a second. Let's do a little math. And I love the math on this stuff because it's really eye-opening when you look at it that way. And so if you use all of these techniques I'm talking about, and it saves you an average of 5 seconds per image, 5 seconds per image. And I think that's being really, really generous, because I know if you think about it, I'll do 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. So it takes about 3 seconds just to roll from the bottom of the screen up to auto per image and just hit that. But I'll use 5 seconds to make the math easy. Maybe you're faster on the mouse than I am. But if you figure out a way to save 5 seconds per every image that runs across your screen that you're looking at, this is how it works out. Now, typical person may shoot 20,000 images a year. Me, I shoot probably 20,000 images. It depends on where I'm at. Sometimes it's 20,000 images every couple of weeks. But I figure I average somewhere, me personally, I average somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 images a year, typically what I take. But if you only shoot 20,000 images, 5 seconds times 20,000 images, that's 100,000 seconds. So it's starting to look pretty substantial. But what does 100,000 seconds mean? Well, that translates into 16,667 minutes. And that's 27.77 hours saved of any kind of post-processing work just by trying to figure out a way that you can save 5 seconds per image. With auto sync, I showed you how to save at least half that on doing that auto sync. If you use auto to start your image processing off with, that one little trick saves you a ton of time. Now, 27.77 hours, I mean, that when you look at it that way, that's getting to be pretty substantial. And if again, if you figure that I don't think 20,000 images is much when it comes to, even hobbyist photographers. Uh, you go on a workshop, if you've got plenty of opportunity to shoot pictures, you're going to shoot half that in 1 week on a travel workshop somewhere. And so when you start looking at that hour saved, that's 3/4 almost of a work week, of a 40-hour work week. And me, again, I started in the first. I'd rather be taking pictures of stuff than I would be behind the computer. But as you kind of use this as a basis, these 5 things I've taught you about how to use Lightroom to speed up, or how these tips to use to speed up your Lightroom workflow. If you start using that as a basis and starting to try to figure out how you can speed up the time, it takes me virtually no time to get done with stuff now. 40 something thousand images from Botswana, to go from ingesting into my computer to calling them to keywording the pictures to the point where I upload them to my website. I did it last summer, and I'm even working hard at it. That's one of those things I do when I'm kind of done working outside or I'm done with the day, and we've eaten supper as a family and everybody's kind of went to their own corner for a couple hours at night. I'll come in here and watch YouTube videos or TV or something on the screen next to me, and I'll sit and go through these pictures. It probably took me 4 or 5 nights, a couple hours a night to go through that many images. And so it's just virtually no time at all. And so without some of these techniques I'm using, you can take, again, 40,000 images times 5 is just by using auto sync, probably saved me 40 hours of time just on doing that instead of having to roll up each and every time. But again, it's those processes. If you work, I've said this before, if you work in any kind of manufacturing, that the whole business is, how do we make things more efficient? How can we move from point A to point B in a more efficient manner? And because time becomes money, and then that time also becomes something you can reallocate to doing something else, taking pictures, hanging out with kids, hanging out with the grandkids, doing whatever, but it's still real time that's saved over time. So that said, there we go. Do we have any questions? Tired of preaching about saving time, Derek.
No, it's good. Look, when you really do the math, it hits in a different way when you see the numbers and you're like, wow, that's a lot of time.
It is, and
That adds up.
it creeps up on you.
Oh, totally does.
It,
Totally does.
I've got a horrible metabolism, and it's like the way I gain weight. I'll lose weight, but then all of a sudden it starts creeping on 1 pound at a time, and before you know it, you're 20 pounds where you used to be, and then you got to
Oh
start the
yeah.
process all over again. You just don't notice it, but when you start looking at it like that and you start doing the math, I mean, it's just, I learned
Yeah.
that lesson a long time ago when I was trying to figure out how can I do this quick, because it was just maddening for me, just trying to get through all the things that are necessary to get through when you take pictures. And again, to be fair, a lot of people really like that process. I don't. I just soon get done with it, have it done right, but I just want to get done with it and move on to the next thing. And so that's why I've really been focused on how to be more productive and more efficient and save time on the process when it comes to working through Lightroom.
Yeah. It can suck the joy out of taking images when you know it's waiting for you on the back end.
It can.
So
It can.
we'll start the questions, and I'll again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to get them in. Cliff from ETCC PPC says, always enjoy your presentations. Notice in the examples you used images from folders. Why not collections? Exception, moving images understood.
Well, and that's a good question. And that's one of the reasons that I justify. I kind of alluded to it in my presentation, but one of the reasons I use folders instead of, well, there's a couple of reasons I use folders instead of collections. Number one, when before there was a Lightroom, when the organization part of digital photography was lagging behind digital photography itself, before Lightroom or Aperture or On One or any of these solutions came out, they were all just mainly just image browsers that you would use. And so when I shot film, I had a big slide cabinet behind my desk in my office. If this was the old days, you'd see a big 4 or 5 drawer lateral file cabinet behind me, and I had all my slides in hanging file in a hanging file folder. And so I had them all categorized by subjects and sub subjects. And so whenever I started switching to digital, it just made sense to me to keep up that same kind of file system in place because it's what my mind was wrapped around and I could find them quicker. So that was the first reason. So it was what I was familiar with originally, Cliff. Number two, it was that system predated any other kind of image management solution. And so before Lightroom and Aperture and all that stuff came out, so I had to do something to organize them. So I did it there. But as Lightroom came out, and here's the hint I gave you, I use Lightroom every day. I mean, I enjoy the program. It's a nice solution for what I like. It's something I know. I'm not going to say it's the best one there is out there because it, like I said, it does have limitations. And the reason for that is I never know when another solution's coming up. So if you marry yourself to collections, that system may not be portable if I decided to move on to another solution because collections are kind of a Lightroom and an Adobe thing. But if you use that folder system that every system, every computer system knows how to use that folder system. If I use that folder system, that organizational system is portable, whether I switch to On1 or I can't think of another, or, Photo Mechanic is getting more robust, or if I switch everything over to Photo Mechanic, or if I switch from PC or from my Mac over to PC, that same basic folder system that is endemic to all computers is portable to no matter what kind of software program I use. And that's the main reason I stuck with it, because in the beginning, Aperture wouldn't recognize the folder system, but Lightroom would. Well, I didn't want to have to go back and rechange my whole folder system just to suit Lightroom. And so I kept it, or just to suit Aperture. So I kept it with Lightroom. And then over time, I realized I'm just going to keep this basic system because, again, it's portable to no matter what software program I choose to use to organize my images. And so right now, that's the main reason that I keep it in folders instead of collections. So I hope that makes sense on my answer. I tend
Yeah.
to give long-winded answers, but a lot of things aren't just cut and dried on, why you choose to do what you do.
Yeah, they usually aren't. Elisa joining us on Vimeo is asking, is there a way to add keywords in batches?
There is. I've got another webinar on that, but I will show you that just really quick in a nutshell. So this is another way that will speed things up immensely. And I've got no dog in this hunt. I'm just like sharing good products when I see them. And this is one of those times. So can you see my screen, Derek? Did I
Yes,
get it
sir.
switched over? Okay. So we'll just keep these same dairy images selected. By the way, I'm always hesitant of showing people the back end because you get to see some pictures that just aren't that good, but I keep them for a reason. And so these are some pictures that aren't that great. Some of them aren't.
I was going to
Uh,
ask, we're going to come back to that. I have a question about that, but we'll let
okay.
you answer this and I'll come back
Okay.
to that.
So anyway, so I've still got those same 39 images selected, and this is a good product I like to recommend. If I go to File and Plugin Extras, I've got a plugin called My Keyworder for Lightroom, and then I can tag those images as a batch. And My Keyworder for Lightroom, the guy gives it away. He just asks for a donation, and so every few months I'll donate to the guy. And so what I can do there is I've got those 39 pictures selected. And I can do, well, let me back up a second right quick. I'm going to close that. If you notice, none of these images have keywords in them now, right? No keyword tags in them. So I'm going to go into my plugin extras, tag images as a batch, and then I'm just going to do a search. And this is where this is a huge time saving thing here. So I'm going to type in dairy. I'll type in dairy farm. And so I'm going to search keywords. And I suspect how this works is this guy's got a database of keywords from other users he collects. And so it's going to search their keywords and all of a sudden populate there on the left of all the possible keywords it can be. So all I do is go down there and I right click all the pictures that or all the keywords, I mean, that I want to include. And the ones I don't want to include, I just don't click them. And so I just pick the ones that are appropriate. I'll click bar in there. And then right here, it's got a right arrow. And I just click the right arrow. And then you can see on the right screen, it just populated that right screen with all the keywords that I want to include on these images. And then it's just save the keywords to the photos, and it's working up there. And then all of a sudden, 39 images, and I did this slow because I was trying to explain it, but all of a sudden, 39 images you can see now are keyworded just like that. And so
Wow.
that's how I batch keyword things.
Wow, that's awesome.
I don't keyword every single image, but I keyword the ones that are kind of I need to find. Because a lot of times you'll have images that are similar and there's no point in keywording everything. And then that gets a little muddled
Mm.
because you do a search for dairy cattle and all of a sudden you're back to having
Too many
2,000
images to
images
go
you're
through.
looking at. So I just kind of I pick out my selects and I keyword the selects.
Okay.
So you had a question?
Well, I'll hold it for now.
Okay.
We had another question that kind of similar thing. Skip asking Photo Mechanic, is that a plugin or a standalone, and how do you use it?
It's a standalone. So I will let me the well, let me show you this. So when I go through pictures, I've got a pretty fast system, but as I start kind of whipping through these pictures fast, it starts to lag in Lightroom. Okay. And so it's easy for me, you know, if you've taken pictures very much, you know that it's if you've taken pictures very much, you just develop the sense. You can probably do this, Derek, where you can look at a picture in an instant and know if it's a good one or not.
Yeah.
By the way, this is awesome. These pictures are in a robotic dairy, so they've got robots that milk all the cows, that
No
will scratch their
way.
backs for them, feed them a measured amount of feed. It's so high tech. This is the most high tech dairy at the time in Texas, is what we're
I need
looking
one
at
of
there.
those.
Automatic back scratcher. Oh, I
Yeah.
know. Uh,
Look, looks a little aggressive though.
yeah. So let me switch this over. So what Photo Mechanic is, it's pretty much just an image browser. So I'll let me go through here. I'm going to browse down to that agriculture photo we were just in. In fact, I'll go to just this. Oops. I'll go to just this one. That's a dairy farm. Double click it. So I use Photo Mechanic is just kind of my first pass on looking for these pictures. My computer thinks I've got too much going on, so it may take a second. Essentially, what Photo Mechanic allows me to do is I can just go through that first pass of images, no editing. There we go, starting to open now. No editing at all. But when I click on these pictures and I just start going through them, it may lag a little bit because we've got all this stuff going on, but I can pretty much, as fast as I can press the right arrow, it'll render the pictures and without having to lag and render them for me to see later on. And you just can't outrun it. That's the good thing about Photo Mechanic. Photo Mechanic, if I remember the story correctly, was developed by a. Am I sharing that Photo Mechanic screen? By the way, yeah, I am.
Yeah. Mhm.
It was developed by I think a sports shooter who's their job is to go uh, shoot pictures like at the Super Bowl, and then for example, or the Olympics, and then halftime they got to dump all those pictures to ESPN or whoever's using them. And so the guy noticed that all the solutions they were using were too slow, and so he developed Photo Mechanic. There's a couple other solutions, but I like doing this because it's just an instant render. And again, in the interest of saving time, yeah, it may only save me, I go out, shoot pictures, come back in, I go through Photo Mechanic. It may only save me 10 minutes, which sounds immaterial, but if you do that 10 minutes 60 times a year, that starts to add up. And then you add all the other time saving things with you. You just all of a sudden you're starting to just claim your time back. But you can look, I'm going through these images as fast as I can press the button on my computer, and it just doesn't. There's just hardly any lag time at all on switching from one image to the next. So that's uh that's how I use Photo Mechanic, but it's a standalone program. I think it's 130 something dollars. I'm not sure. I don't have it again, just like my keyworder for Lightroom. I don't have any dog in that hunt. I just like when I find a good product, I like to recommend it. I'm not sponsored by anybody, so it's not me trying to get you to buy a product that I get a commission off of. I just like recommending good products. So hope that answers that question.
Love it. We'll sneak one last question in from Paige joining us on Vimeo.
Okay.
How can I attach each Lightroom catalog next to my file folder? Then when I'm back home, I can upload all my photos, including the Lightroom catalog, to my main computer.
I'm not sure of that question.
All right.
I'd
So
have to. Well, let me encourage Paige. Is that who asked you the question?
yeah,
Let me send me an email, Paige. I'd
there
love
you
to help
go.
you with that. I'd love to help you figure that out. If you'll send me an email, I can certainly. I think I understand the question, but I'm not sure I do. So I want to kind of hear a little more about what the problem she's having before I attempt to give an answer. So
Perfect. And that goes for everyone else. If you guys do have a question, sometimes it's not as easy to get a nice short form question in. There's some nuance to the questions that
yeah,
require a little extra information. So there's Russell's information there. And as I said to start this, Russell's going to be back. He's not going anywhere. So you guys will see him here again for sure. And if there are any questions that you guys have, feel free to get those in whenever you see Russell back on. Now, Russell, the question I had before was, do you delete ever? Do you go through or do you clear anything out? Or how long do you hold on to images? Do you never delete?
well, so when I go through my first pass of images, if it's not a good picture, if it's not a good image, and maybe that's a webinar I'm pitching now. Maybe it's a webinar we do one day is picking the picture. How do you know what's a good picture from a bad picture? But all the pictures I deem being bad, I delete them because what I
Okay.
learned a long time ago, Derek, is don't fall in love with something that's not going to love you back, and a bad picture will never love you back. And so I delete them. And so sometimes a marginal picture I'll hang them to if it's in focus, if it's if it's in focus and is exposed correctly, I'll keep. In the instance of some of those dairy farm shots you saw, that was for a commercial shoot. There's some of those pictures that aren't, they're not award winning. They're just kind of a mundane shot, but they're a documentary shot that the client wanted just as an illustrative picture of that because we went out there to photograph that high tech barn, and they just wanted illustrative shots of stuff in the barn that again won't win any awards, aren't from just a beauty standpoint just a great picture, but they document something. So they were in focus. They were exposed properly. They served my purpose, so I kept them. But anything else that's out of focus or the exposure is so bad that I can't fix it, or the composition's so bad that I can't fix it, I usually delete those and don't think twice about it. Just move on with my life. Because again, best advice I give anybody: don't fall in love with something that's not going to love you back.
I
And a
love
bad
that.
picture's never shown me any love.
I love that. It's always interesting to get other photographers' takes on it,
Yeah,
because it's like you said, if it's you realize when you delete stuff, or like me, when you lose a hard drive, it aches for a while, and then after a while, you forget about the images, you stop
yeah,
stressing them, and I think that the same goes for these bad images. It's easy to make excuses and think that you're going to need it someday for something,
yeah.
and oftentimes you don't.
There's uh oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Uh, anyway, I was going to make a point on top of yours, but I thought about something else. Then I lost it. I'm getting old, Derek.
I'm rubbing
Uh,
off on you. You've been
no,
hanging out with me
oh,
too
oh
much.
no, I remember what I was going to say. To me, I think that's the beauty of photography and post processing and all this stuff. I mean, there's just so many different ways of doing it. I mean, I just one thing I try to encourage and empower people to do is you don't have to do it my way. Just do it some way, especially when it comes to managing your images, because
Mhm.
that's the thing that frustrates people is they take all these pictures and they just sit there and they don't know what to do. They don't know where to start. And what's that old proverb that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And that's what I try to encourage people to do is just, this is the way I do it. Maybe not the best way to do it, or certainly not the only way to do it, but it's my way and it works out pretty good for me. But
Mhm.
figure out what your way is and just do it, and reignite your joy for photography. And don't be afraid to go out and take pictures. And so take my advice, figure out those time saving things. If you find this part of photography mundane, and just go out, take pictures, and have a lot of fun.
That's a great way to do it. Huge thank you to you, Russell. I
Thank you,
did see a
sir.
question sneak in, so
Okay.
you know what?
I've got,
Let's what's another
I,
minute, right?
yeah, I've got time.
All right. Abdullah on join us on YouTube asking, how do you use the histogram in a good way on Lightroom?
I'm probably the wrong guy to ask that question, but let me switch over and I'll tell you why I'm the wrong guy to ask that question is because I don't use the histogram a whole lot.
I'm a big histogram person, so I can tap in at any time
Oh,
here.
I hope you do. So one of the ways I do use the histogram is, let me find a good shot to show that. Let me think about this for a second. Let's just go down. I'll find one here in my Cowboys folder. One of the ways I do use Instagram a lot is like this shot here well, let me find this. Let me go to this shot right here of this guy. So this shot was this is a friend of mine. I've known him for 30 years. He's a cowboy on a ranch out in West Texas, in that area where I used to live. It's how I got to know him. He's a rancher, and but he's also is gracious enough whenever I need him to be a model for me. So we're teaching portrait photography and taking pictures in natural light. So this was actually an old abandoned church where we shot this picture. And so the one way I use histogram a lot uh, is on this one. We've got kind of a hot spot there, and I'll use it to help me guide. Like if I'm going to go in my develop module, just to help me guide sort of where I need the exposure to be, because if you can see as I move that exposure too dark, all that stuff kind of starts going off the rails. And so essentially what I try to do is keep to a point, sort of like when you're driving down the road. When I was learning how to drive, my dad just said the best advice I can give you, by the way, out in the country, you learn to drive young. So I was like 6 years old when I learned how to drive. Keep it between the ditches. And so I always look at the histogram like each side of it, those are the ditches. So I just try to keep everything between the ditches when I'm making my adjustments. So that's kind of the way I use the histogram. Go. I'd love to hear how you do it, Derek, because I've never I use it from time to time, but I'm not a religious user of the histogram, so I'm always eager to learn.
So I use the histogram mostly for my editing, because the histogram it's reference. It's really just a reference point. And to use this picture right here, it's probably not the best example because it's more evenly exposed. But if there's a picture that you have a really stark contrast between light and dark, obviously your histogram is going to spike in one direction. So right here, this is more of a better example right there, or
Here's
even
one. Here's
even
one
here,
there. Yeah, it's kind of a
So
high key.
yeah, it's very high key. You're not expecting to pull. I mean, it's exposed for the rancher and it's not exposed for the sky. So I'm not even paying attention to the histogram in sense of light and dark. I pay attention to the histogram a lot of times in regards to colors. So I'll go into the color channels histogram. So if you guys see the colors there on the histogram, you have your color channels there and you see how the yellows are spiked. And before you made that change, you had that, yeah, the yellow was really spiked and it corresponds to obviously the same to midtones, highlights, and shadows. So I'll use my color channels to color balance and I'll use it creatively to add, I can flatten out the shadows a little bit and get that softer, kind of flatter look to the blacks. And I don't flatten out the whites too much. I like a little pop and a little contrast. But it's more seasoning to taste for me. And I think it's important for people to learn how to really adjust manually rather than having a preset frame of mind where it's easy to buy presets. And I'm not knocking any of that, but I think you get so much more control over your images when you can go in and you know how to tweak the curves and to tweak the color channels to get the look that you want. You have so much control over that. And one way I do it is through the curves channel, whether it's the just the regular curves channel or going into the color channels and actually adjusting the curves of the color channels. But that's essentially you get a histogram laid over onto the curves channel there. And exactly like you have pulled up right there.
Yeah,
And it really just it lets me know what areas are peaking, what areas are I have less of, whether that relates to my luminosity or the color balance. So on this, depending on the look I'm going for, I might want to pull the yellows down. Maybe I want to get more of like more, bring the red, more of a red look and bump it more towards red than yellow. It allows me to do that. So I don't know if that helped too much. It's hard to give a on the fly answer without having readily prepared examples. But I think what you said in terms of keep between the ditches is a great way to look at it, especially for people who are learning. If you guys are learning about photography, pay attention to your histogram while you're out photographing. I think that's what's important is the histogram can only help you so much when you're pulling the image up in Lightroom. Where you really want to pay attention to a histogram is when you're out photographing. And I think for those who are newer and who are getting their feet wet, so to speak, in learning about exposure, especially when you're dealing with tricky exposures, maybe this is our calling, Russell, to, the workshop we had bounced around about tricky exposures. I know you have one that you do on taking tricky exposures. That might be good to kind of bake in some processing and shooting
Yeah.
tips for that.
Can I show you one thing? Because I think it popped up when I was looking for some pictures
Yeah,
earlier. So
go for it.
one of these days, Derek, when I come up to New York, if you're lucky, I'll show you how to do sweet Photoshop composites like that.
You have no idea how on brand that is for me. That is as on brand as it gets for me.
So I'm not this bad at Photoshop, but I did on purpose because
oh no, that's the next workshop we're doing, Russell.
I was in Alaska and someone had asked me on Facebook, how's the aurora look? And I'm like, this is the most awesome night. We had an auroral storm that was so awesome that lightning shot out and the wolves and bears showed up, and then Ronnie James Dio made an appearance from the dead to do one final show. And so that was the picture I put on Facebook.
Oh, that
But
is
I know
so good.
when I was scrolling through a while ago, people probably saw that and like, what in the world is
They're
that?
like, wait, hold on. We want to see him talk about that one. Why didn't he fold that one up in the presentation?
I'll show you this too. You'll hate it. This guy here is a friend of mine. He's my age. I graduated high school with him, and this was his son going to college. So I found an old high school picture of my friend, and then tried to Photoshop. I made it obviously look bad, but that's what I posted on Facebook for them to see.
That
so
is awesome.
I try not to
Yeah,
take myself too seriously on this stuff. It's all supposed to be fun.
it makes it fun. And you know
It
what?
does.
It's a great way to spin it into a real tip. It's a great way to practice.
It is.
And learn what all the different tools do is to just go in there and have some fun with it every
And
once
that's
in a
what
while.
and that's how I learn different techniques I do. I just try to do something goofy and kind of dumb and hopefully make somebody laugh and make it purposefully bad because it's I try to make it as kitschy as I can make it look.
There you go. Life's too short to take everything too seriously,
Oh,
right?
I agree.
Well, Russell, always good to have you on. Always a wealth of knowledge and experience. The good vibes. We mixed in a little fun today. Anytime you
Yep.
can get Dio in there, it's always a good workshop.
Maybe the first one ever, right?
Right? I think this might be the first time Dio's popped up in a workshop.
You're
So
welcome. You're welcome, by the way.
yes, thank you for that. We're gonna have to make it. It's got to be in every one now. You got to throw like a little Easter egg in there for me.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Love it. Well, Russell, huge thank you to you again. To all of our viewers out there, definitely check Russell out. We had the information up there, and if you're just catching this on a replay, feel free to just hit the QR code there, and it'll pull everything up. To all of our viewers out there, we thank you guys as always for tuning in. We do it for you guys. This is why we put out the free education. And to Russell, thank you for always coming on and bringing a pleasant smile to everyone's face.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Likewise, and that is all we have for you today. Another rendition of the B&H virtual event space in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Bye, everyone.